This week on Q&A, author and investigative journalist Richard Miniter. His latest book is called Mastermind, The Many Faces of the 9/11 Architect Khalid Shaikh Mohammed.
Richard Miniter, author of Mastermind. What is it?
Mastermind is the first book to look at the life of Khalid Shaikh Mohammed, the man who planned the 9/11 attacks and all of the other major al-Qaeda attacks that you've heard about. He's the deadly brains behind al-Qaeda. He's what made al-Qaeda much, much more lethal. And before he was captured, when he first joined al-Qaeda, they were killing dozens at a time. As soon as he got into senior leadership, they began killing hundreds and then thousands at a time. After he was captured in March 2003, the lethality of al-Qaeda fell, and they're back to killing dozens at a time. So this is the guy that really mattered. And understanding him is about understanding the future of the war on terror. Now that bin Laden is dead, this is what we have to fear, these terrorist entrepreneurs like Khalid Shaikh Mohammed.
When did you start this book?
About 2 years ago. I mean, this question had been on my mind, frankly, for about 10 years, since 9/11. How do people become terrorists? How do educated, successful people at the top of their society? Remember, about 2/3 of al-Qaeda are college graduates, usually with advanced degrees, compared to only 6% of the Arab world. So they're the best of their society from the educational point of view. How do these people become transformed? What series of choices do they make to become terrorists, to kill hundreds and thousands of other people? And that's what the question I was interested in. And instead of doing a sociological tract, I've been to look at the story of one man, Khalid Shaikh Mohammed, who planned 9/11, the embassy bombings, the attack on the Cole, the Bali bombing, and so on.
Did he kill, with his own hands, Dan Pearl?
Yes. Wall Street Journal reporter Daniel Pearl was killed by Khalid Shaikh Mohammed. And I found out one of the main reasons he did it. It had nothing to do with ideology. After 9/11, he was holed up in Pakistan, as many al-Qaeda leaders are. And he got a new nickname inside al-Qaeda, a nickname he didn't like very much. It was KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken. He ate buckets and buckets of the stuff. And he ballooned up from about 140 pounds, he's about 5'4", from about 140 pounds to more than 200 pounds. And so there was a lot of ribbing inside al-Qaeda about the fact that the brain was now like a Jabba the Hutt-like girth. And he was not deadly, they thought. So when he heard about the Wall Street Journal reporter being kidnapped, he bought him from his captor and brought a film crew to where he was being held and personally cut off his head. He did it for ego and pride and to show he was tough.
It took me a while, but I found the video on the web. I mean, doesn't hit you right out, at least when I tried to find it.
Sure.
And I read that this Georgetown group, the students that studied the whole murder, I guess they found information, maybe you found the information about comparing the veins in his hand to Khalid Shaikh Mohammed. First of all, where is he today?
Khalid Shaikh Mohammed is now in Camp 7 at Guantanamo.
And when did they prove that he was the murderer? I don't mean the Georgetown kids, but when did the government prove that?
Well, technically the government hasn't proved it. I mean, there's still ongoing charges, and he hasn't faced trial yet.
Has he admitted it?
He has admitted it repeatedly, and there's the video on the web, as you say, does compare his veins, in his hands, to the killer's knife. There are also larger videos that were seen in the Middle East that show more of the outtakes and stuff, and Khalid Shaikh Mohammed is clearly all over it.
I want to put his picture on it's the picture everybody's probably seen. Where was that picture taken and when?
That picture was taken the night he was captured in late February, early March 2003. He was staying at the home of a prominent microbiologist, a very famous guy in Pakistan. His wife was the microbiologist's wife was the head of a largest political party, the local leader of the largest political party in Pakistan. And he was asleep in a spare bedroom at about 2 a.m. when CIA, paramilitary, special forces, and Pakistanis burst in on him.
Where is he today?
And today he's at Camp 7 in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, under the protection of the U.S. Navy.
I have to tell you that the most interesting chapter in this book to me was his North Carolina experience. If you don't mind, I'd like to get you to talk about that.
I'd be happy to.
When did he come to this country first?
His first trip to the United States is 1984. and he really didn't understand much about our country. I talked to the man who picked him up from the airport, and one of the things that he remembers, this is the dean of Chowan College in Murfreesboro, North Carolina, is him looking at the window and being surprised to see people sitting on their front lawn in front of the highway. And that doesn't happen in the Middle East. In the Middle East, everything happens behind walls. The public street is something to be avoided. Windows are small. But the idea of just sitting outside in the sunshine in front of a major highway, something you see all over the American South, just struck him as bizarre. And then, of course, the greenery, the lushness of this country, the fact that poor people, rich people, people of all classes have trees and grass, was very different from what he experienced in Kuwait. So the environment was different, and the culture was very different.
Where was he born?
He was born in Kuwait, outside of Kuwait City in Kuwait.
Parents were what? What did they do?
His parents came from the mountains of Iran in a region called Baluchistan, which is the Baluch are people without a country. Their land is divided into three countries: Afghanistan, Iran, and Pakistan. And they fought the leaders of all three of those countries at different times, trying to get independence. His father came in 1950, I think, or 1951, to Kuwait. The records are still kind of sparse on this, and his mother followed shortly thereafter. They had a number of children, at least 4 in front of Khalid Shaikh Mohammed. His father died when he was very young, and his mother, there's no welfare at the time, the 1960s and 1970s in Kuwait, so his mother had to take any job that she could get. So she washed the bodies of the dead before burial.
Why did he come to North Carolina, to Chowan? It's now a university, it was a college then. Why did he come?
He came to Chowan for 2 reasons. One is that the English language standards were very lax, and his English was poor. He was very good in science and math, but his English wasn't up to par. He couldn't have passed a standardized test. So he looked for a college with a weak entrance exam. And 2, if we look at the pattern of Arab foreign students, they're different from other kinds of foreign students, such as Indians or Japanese or what have you, is the Arabs tend to follow social networks much more than other foreign students. So the fact that a few other Arabs had gone there, that people he had been related to or knew of had been there before, made a big difference to him.
You talk in your book about the Muslim community in North Carolina. Why back in 1984 were there other communities with Muslims?
Well, there were transfer students, quite a few, and then there were some Arabs that had fled either the Lebanese Civil War or other developments in the Arab world and had settled in North Carolina. There was also a great demand for technical jobs in the Research Triangle area that drew some of them in as well.
How much of a Muslim follower was he in those days?
Apparently very severe. I mean, he'd like to go to Burger King and order burgers without the meat and make a big show of eating it without the meat. And you'd say, why? And he'd say, well, I can't be sure, he'd say, that this beef was prepared to Islamic standards of purity. He would police other students. He was one of a group that was known as the mullahs that would tell other foreign students, other Muslim students, not to wear shorts because those are forbidden by certain teachings of Muhammad, not to cover their ankle with socks, and all of these very fine points of dress and behavior. Obviously no alcohol and no pork.
Chowan, a Southern Baptist school, still is.
Absolutely.
Why would someone who's a Muslim and a religious and all come to a Baptist school?
Again, affordable tuition. Other Arabs had been there before and lax English requirements. There was, about a quarter of his class was foreign, so he maybe it was a little easier for him to fit in. The interesting thing, and I can't find anybody who could give me a good account of this, is that he was required every week to attend chapel. Now, it was mostly a lecture, sometimes of music. It wasn't a Christian religious service, but he was supposed to attend chapel with the other students. According to records, he did so, but he never objected. And I looked at a number of former classmates and professors, anyone who might have a recollection, but no one seems to remember him objecting.
Here's a picture of a man that you met down there. What's his name?
That's Garth Fail. There he is in his classroom where he's taught for more than 30 years.
Did you take that picture?
I think I did, yeah. Yes, I did take that picture.
And when did you meet him, and what did you find out from him?
Garth Fail taught chemistry. He taught Khalid Shaikh Mohammed, and he's the only professor who has a really vivid memory at Chowan of Khalid Shaikh Mohammed. And a very organized man, still teaches in a suit. That's actually not taken while he's in class. It's taken during his summer vacation, I think. He was Professor of the Year last year, but interesting, devoted man, leaving a careful life that's, affecting hundreds of students a year. And
what's he remember from Khalid Shaikh Mohammed?
he remembers him as a good student who had very poor English. He never had any political discussions with him, or religious debates for that matter. But he remembers him as someone who had a very orderly mind. And unfortunately, an orderly mind can be put to good or evil. And in this case, it was put to evil.
How big is he? Meaning KSM?
He's about 5'4", and I don't know what his current weight is, but he gets double meals at Guantanamo, so I'm assuming that he's in the 200-pound range.
When you went to Chuan, what else did you do while you were there? Did you find anybody else that had ever heard of him?
It was hard. I went to the school library. I went through all of the yearbooks in the year. He was invisible in the yearbooks. I talked to other professors. I talked to deans. The dean who picked him up from the airport, I went and saw him in another city in North Carolina. And it's interesting. I mean, Chuan sort of made a budgetary choice. They were running short of students. They were really financially in jeopardy, and so they began admitting more foreign students, thinking they wouldn't have to give them as much aid. But ultimately, I think it started to change the character of the college in some good ways and in some bad ones. You
say in your book that he paid his tuition several months before he got there. Was that unusual?
Well, as a reporter, one of my instincts is to follow the money. And so I went and looked and got some extraordinary access from Chuan, I must say, to look at the financial records. And that's when I discovered that he paid in advance for an entire semester's tuition, months before he arrived. Also, his visa application, which the college had a copy of, mentions a private sponsor, but there's no idea who that private sponsor must be. His family was so poor in Kuwait, they didn't have a telephone. They didn't have a rich uncle, so it makes you wonder who the private sponsor might be.
How long did he stay at Chuan?
For 1 semester.
Then what?
Then he transferred to North Carolina A&T, an historically black college in Greensboro, North Carolina, the alma mater of Jesse Jackson and Ronald McNair, the astronaut.
How long did he stay there?
He graduated in May or June 1986 with a degree in engineering, so about 3 years.
What did he study?
Engineering, but also he took chemistry and other hard sciences.
Did you find anybody there that can remember him?
I found a number of people who did, people who spoke both on and off the record. The Muslim students the former Muslim students, who are now professionals in the Greensboro area, had the most vivid memory of him. They spent the most time with him. They remember him as a comedian. He loved something called the Friday Tonight Show, where he would be a cast member in this informal student group and be a stand-up comic and do routines where he impersonated Arab leaders and other Muslim personalities. And he was very popular and very good at that.
You talked to an imam, I guess, that knew him.
Yes.
Was that off the record, or?
It was for security reasons. There's still a lot of hesitation to talk outside of their community and what the repercussions might be. I must say, though, having spent a lot of time with this imam, that if he would be public, he could be a very important bridge of understanding. And I think someone who understands both the American life and Islam could be beneficial to the country.
What else did you learn from him?
I learned a lot about the interior life of Khalid Shaikh Mohammed and about his family. This imam had spent a lot of time with him and with his extended family, knew him both from Kuwait days and as a student, and got an idea of the intellectual forces shaping KSM, but also I learned about his driving record. Khalid Shaikh Mohammed was a terrible driver, drove with an expired license, often drove at high speed and smashed into parked cars. In one car, 2 women were talking when Khalid Shaikh Mohammed's car smashed into theirs. The women were badly injured and they sued for their medical costs. Their last name was Christian, his is Mohammed. The lawsuit in the North Carolina court records is Christian v. Mohammed, 1985.
A paragraph from your book. America would be good to KSM. In return, he would use his college years to make alliances he would need in future terror attacks and plot his first assassination on American soil, which will be discussed here for the first time. What are you discussing for the first time?
The murder of Meir Kahan. Meir Kahan was a Zionist, an American Jewish rabbi who ultimately became a member of the Israeli Knesset, but was very outspoken, very pro-Israel, and called for the Palestinian Arabs to leave the Gaza and the West Bank, and for this the land that was biblically Israel's to be Israel's today. And it was not a mainstream position, to put it casually, but he gave speeches all throughout the United States and raised tremendous amounts of money. He founded the Jewish Defense League. And in 1986, he spoke in Greensboro, North Carolina, at North Carolina A&T. And that speech was seen by Khalid Shaikh Mohammed, and it outraged him, because this is someone who had a diametrically opposed point of view. KSM often lied and said that he had a Palestinian mother or grandmother or some Palestinian relationship. In fact, in his genealogy, there's no connection to Palestine. But most of the students and the high school teachers that he had in Kuwait were Palestinian. And his social world in the Muslim Brotherhood in Kuwait was primarily Palestinian. So he identified very strongly with the PLO and Black September and those radical groups of the 1970s. And so when he heard Kahan, it was an alternate point of view. And for KSM, the problem is not that people disagree. The problem is that alternative point of views exist, that there should be a single unified view, and unsurprisingly, it's his. And so he plotted to kill Kahan. Now, there's a stray mention of this. There's a one-line mention of this buried in a footnote in the 9/11 Commission report, in that he claimed that he had killed Kahan, or had Kahan killed, and that the CIA didn't believe him. But when you look into it, you discover that they didn't investigate that very hard. And when you begin to look at the case in detail, you see that the entire cell that was used, the getaway driver, the gunman, and so on, that was used in the assassination of Kahan was later reused in Khalid Shaikh Mohammed's attack on the World Trade Center in February 1993.
Go back to that point. Where was Kahan shot?
In New York City in 1990.
In what hotel?
Oh, wow.
Marriott East.
That's right, yes.
I've read it since you wrote it. The reason I ask you that, because that whole scenario after that of the cab waiting outside the hotel, after and KSM did not shoot him.
No, that's right, he didn't.
So who did he get to shoot him?
I believe he got El Sayed Nosair to kill him, and he's an interesting character, too. It wasn't his first attempted murder. His first attempted murder was an attack on a gay bar in Greenwich Village. He picked them out of the phone book. He was a New York City sanitation worker, an immigrant to the United States, who worked for the sanitation department and was ultimately fired because he kept bothering the other workers, trying to persuade them to embrace Islam as their religion. And then he became further radicalized and attacked the gay bar, and was brought into this cell and was the gunman, the one who shot twice, I think, Meyer Kahan.
Meyer Kahan died there an hour later? Or?
Yeah, I think he was taken to the hospital and after being wounded, and died in surgery.
But when Nosair walked out of the hotel, the cab driver, because the cab driver is a connection to the 93, as you say.
One of the connections to the 93 World Trade Center bombing. That's right. The cab driver is waiting for him, and he gets into the wrong cab. And starts barking orders, and this is New York. The cabbie just turns around and starts barking right back. So he bolts out of the cab, where he runs into an armed postal inspector, and they shoot it out. And ultimately, Nosair is taken to the same hospital as Kahan.
Where's Nosair today?
I believe he's still in jail. He was retried on some of these counts, or tried in a different way, but for some of the same facts, I should say, in 1995, and is still convicted. I believe he's in Sing Sing.
So what's the connection to 93 World Trade Center bombing with
let's see. World Trade Center bombing, the bombers issued demands after the bombing, and the first of those demands was the release of Nosair from prison. So that's one connection. Second connection is the cab driver in the shooting of Kahan, the one that Nosair didn't get into, drove the getaway car for the World Trade Center. There were another figure who videotaped the murder of Kahan posing as a member of the audience, was part of the bomb plot for the World Trade Center, and there are several other personalities directly involved in both.
Ramzi Youssef, what's his role in all this?
Ramzi Youssef is not involved in the Kahan murder, but he is involved. He builds the bomb. He's the cousin, and that's one of the critical friendships or relationships that defines KSM's life. is his younger cousin, 3 years younger. They grew up together as best friends, but with an unequal relationship. Definitely KSM is the master of that relationship.
Where is Ramzi Youssef today?
He's now in Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado.
Go back to the North Carolina experience for KSM. What happened to him in his time down there, and how many years was it total?
I believe it's a total of 3.5, almost 4 years.
Because you talk about their hatred for Israel, but how much of this is a hatred for the United States, or a hatred for Israel, or a hate because the United States supports Israel?
A lot of it, more than I expected, is because the United States supports Israel. In the 1980s in North Carolina, it would not be hard for KSM to meet ordinary Americans who admired Israel as the only Middle Eastern democracy, as a place that many churches take people for historical visits and religious visits. And so, Israel is generally admired, and I think this came as a great shock to him. In that court case that I mentioned, Christian v. Mohammed, he tracked down their lawyer, Stephen J. Teague, and visited him in his offices and had lectured him about Israel and Palestine, about the Iran-Iraq war and so on. But clearly, he thought the Americans were really misinformed about Israel, and that was a motivator. And later, when he talked to his high school principal, I think I quote that in that chapter, it was America's views of Israel and support of Israel that initially made him anti-American. But he didn't like the way we lived. He didn't like the freedom. He didn't like the equality between men and women. He didn't like the openness, the casualness of American society, where people would sit out in public and have conversations with people who'd walk by. This casualness, for some reason, just really bothered him.
I'm not sure how to ask this, but I'll just ramble a little bit. He comes over to the United States to be in our educational system. Mm-hmm. The educational system welcomes foreign visitors. Is this what we get for it?
Well, sometimes. And I'm always looking for the dog that doesn't bark. If you look at, and there have been, Ramzi, this is not the only case of a student who comes to America and becomes radicalized and joins Al-Qaeda, let alone other terrorist groups. But I'm not aware of any case of someone going to a military college, either a public one like West Point or Annapolis, or a private one like Valley Forge or the Citadel, who becomes radicalized. And I think the difference is that the way we deal with students in military colleges, you're integrated into a larger unit. Yes, there's enormous demands on you as an individual, but they're really forming unit cohesion. You're part of the group from the beginning, and that's really important. In American public colleges, non-military colleges, civilian colleges, it's sink or swim. Once they admit you to the college, they show you where the library and the cafeteria are, and you're kind of on your own. So if you don't form a good relationship with your dorm mate, if you find it hard to deal with other students, it's just your tough luck. And I think that's alienating, especially to a lot of foreign students. And remember the 9/11 hijackers in the rental car? The FBI found a notebook describing the difference between conditioner, shampoo, and body wash in Arabic. We forget how much people coming from a different culture don't necessarily know about our own. We assume that everything about our culture is universal and easy to understand because it is for us. And so I think college administrators don't recognize how hard it is for these guys to make the switch. I think they really need to improve orientation and need to improve the way in which they deal with foreign students.
I want to put back on the screen the picture, a couple of pictures, because you have on the front of your book 3 different pictures. Mm-hmm. We'll go back to you can see the cover of your book. It's the same man?
Yes.
What was he doing in those different worlds? And was it a disguise, or was just?
He's a master of disguise. He knew how to change himself. He had more than 50 different identities. I have a list of confirmed aliases in the back of the book. And that's one of the interesting things throughout the 90s. He sort of slips his way through various countries.
Where was this picture taken, and how old is it?
That's the most recent picture of Khalid Shaikh Mohammed. That was taken in Guantanamo a few years ago. Here's an interesting thing. He said for many years, Khalid Shaikh Mohammed said it was un-Islamic to take pictures of living things. And in this picture, he spent hours and hours posing for the Red Cross photographer to take that picture in Guantanamo. Did
he know what he was doing?
Absolutely.
Why would the Red Cross help him in this process?
Well, that's a very good question. I guess the official answer, which I was told, was that it's in order to ensure the family of the detainees that that the detainees are being well treated, they would take photographs of them. But of course, the propaganda value of this photo was enormous, and within days of the family receiving the photo, it was up on Al-Qaeda websites around the world.
Let's go back over...
and the New York Times shortly after.
Let's go back over what Khalid Shaikh Mohammed has done, and how much of this has been proved.
I don't think there's any great doubt about his role in most of these, although there are some questions about some of the operations. He came up with the idea for 9/11. He recruited the team. He supervised the process.
From where?
From Afghanistan and Pakistan, from inside Al-Qaeda. I mean, obviously bin Laden had a role, both funding and in shaping the operation. But 9/11 is very much the creation of a single man, and that man is Khalid Shaikh Mohammed.
How do we know that?
We know this from other detainees, from internal documents in Al-Qaeda. Of course, Khalid Shaikh Mohammed says it. No one disputes it. I mean, he's given a tremendous amount of respect in Guantanamo by the other detainees because his role in the attacks is very well acknowledged.
What did he have to do with the 93 attack on the World Trade Center?
He arranged for the money, and he may have masterminded that attack as well. His cousin and his closest friend in the world, Ramzi Youssef, went to New York to organize that cell and then to build that bomb in a warehouse called the Space Station Warehouse, actually, just across the river from Lower Manhattan, and then delivered the bomb, killing 7 people.
What was the scheme that you write about where he was going to pilot one of the planes and land it?
Oh, yeah, this is one of the funny details I learned about 9/11. In one of the initial, the plan went through a number of changes between 1998 and 2001. In the early stages, they wanted to hijack 11 planes, and one of them would be piloted by Khalid Shaikh Mohammed himself. And he would kill all the men, land the plane, release the women and children, hold a press conference, and then fly off into the sunset in a passenger jet. Really like the plot of a bad movie. Obviously, bin Laden vetoed this idea.
When was he arrested?
He was arrested in March 2003.
By
a combination of U.S. CIA and Special Forces and Pakistani Special Forces.
How'd they find him?
They got lucky. A walk-in, which is an intelligence term for someone who just volunteers and comes by the embassy and says, I've got something you should know. Now, these people are not usually welcomed with open arms, but if they pass a number of tests, they are taken seriously. In this case, a man walked in and said he'd recently been with KSM and that he would be with KSM for dinner later that night. Now, that really got the attention of the CIA because informants don't usually suggest that they're going to see the key subject in a few hours. They usually say, well, it'll be a few weeks or months. They're hoping to get a little money out of it. This guy didn't ask for money, although he did want the reward, and I think he ultimately got it.
What was it, the reward?
At the time, I think it was $5 million. I could be wrong about that, but I think it was $5 million. Anyway, it was sort of a funny story. He gets a phone number from one of the CIA operatives in Islamabad, Pakistan. And remember, Islamabad is the largest CIA station in the world. That's where we spend the majority of our energy fighting Al-Qaeda. And 2/3 of all Al-Qaeda in the world, senior Al-Qaeda, have been killed or captured in Pakistan. That's more than Afghanistan and Iraq combined. So this is party central for Al-Qaeda. And he gets a cell phone number, and a few hours later, about 11 o'clock at night, he goes to the bathroom of a restaurant and texts the CIA officer he'd met earlier that day and says, I am with KSM. And they meet up a few hours later, and they said he's just dropped KSM off. Kind of a funny story. He can't remember the address of the house. I mean, it's not like many parts of the United States where they write the address number on the curb.
This is the one with the picture you've got in the book?
Yeah, I think so, yes.
Yeah. 18A Nissan Road.
That's right.
Rawalpindi?
Rawalpindi, and which is just south of Islamabad in the mountains. And that's a very prosperous neighborhood. He was staying in the equivalent of Beverly Hills of Rawalpindi.
Have you been to that house?
I've not been to that house, but I've been to Rawalpindi.
So what did they do once they captured him?
He was taken to a series of secret prisons. It's really hard to document what was going on in that period between 2003 and 2006 when he was transferred to Guantanamo. It appears that he spent some time in Romania in Bangkok, and in a secret CIA secret facility outside of Warsaw, Poland.
Why would they have moved him around that much?
You're sort of a guest of another country's intelligence service, and you can only have someone as a guest for so long. Also, sometimes changing people's environments gets them moving. There might be also other detainees that they want to cross-examine and put him with. There are reasons for doing it.
This is 2011. How old is he today?
How old is he today? He was born in 1964, so I'm a writer, not a mathematician.
47?
47, yeah.
If, depending on the time of the year he was born. How old would that have made him when he planned 9/11? That would be 37, or earlier than that.
That's right. And in fact, part of the inspiration for 9/11 comes from his viewing of the science fiction movie Independence Day, where the flying saucers blow up the World Trade Center and the other New York landmarks, and they take out the White House and so on. Yeah, that was part of his inspiration.
But all you keep telling us is that it's what we were afraid of in the first place, that a lot of the ideas he gets is based on the way we live.
Absolutely.
Our colleges, our lifestyle, our movies.
Absolutely. And the relentless criticism of America that he heard in college, he says, well, these are the Americans talking. If they're this critical of this country, it must be really bad. Instead of thinking, well, boy, these Americans are trying really hard to give a balanced view of their society.
So how did you personally go about collecting all this information? Where did you go besides North Carolina?
Well, North Carolina was very interesting, but I went to North Africa, to various places in the Middle East, and then I talked to a number of European intelligence services, especially for the chapter on his time in Bosnia, and both with French intelligence, British intelligence, and some the German equivalent of the FBI.
What do you think is new in this book? Besides, we already established that the whole North Carolina thing was somewhat new.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that he had a criminal record in the United States, his experiences in college, that's new. The fact that he played an active role and worked essentially for Iran in Bosnia, carrying out attacks, I think is new.
How old would he have been then?
Well, that was 1993, 94, so
being in
20,
his 30s.
Yeah, 30s, yeah.
20s and 30s.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's new. His time on Guantanamo, and I don't think that has been really gotten him a lot of attention.
How did you get that?
Through talking to a number of current and former Navy and CIA personnel who had direct access.
How classified is his time there? I mean,
well, fairly classified. I mean, one of the great frustrations, this is like writing a biography of a dead person, in that, it's actually harder than writing a biography of a dead person, right? Because I couldn't talk to him. The U.S. government was not allowing any interviews with Khalid Shaikh Mohammed, or with his Ramzi Youssef or other relatives. He's in the segregated section of the high-value detainee camp at Gitmo. Is another guy named Ammar al-Baluchi, who is a nephew of Khalid Shaikh Mohammed, who worked for him. And so none of these people are available for interviews. Usually if you're writing a book about a person you can't contact, it's because that person is dead. And as a result, the people around him will talk more freely because he's not around to offer his opinion on what they have to say. But when you're writing a book about someone like this you can't talk to but isn't dead, people are very careful what they say. They're still worried about that ongoing relationship they have with him. So even 10 or 15, 20 years after he's left North Carolina or the United States, the people are still concerned about, well, don't say that one person said to me who knew Khalid Shaikh in college, don't say that I said that he was a terrorist. That might hurt his feelings.
How many people did you talk to that actually knew him?
About a dozen who knew him, and non-U.S. governmental personnel who knew him.
And what would they say about his brain power?
He was very smart. I mean, education is not the solution to terrorism. Most of these guys are very educated. What's lacking is empathy, the ability to put themselves in another person's place, and the ability to debate ideas, different ideas about politics, religion, how society should be organized. The idea that there's not one answer to these, but that they can be actively debated. that isn't pushed. I think if we had a core curriculum at some of these colleges where they were forced to meet lots of different ideas, and even if they were forced to debate ideas that they didn't themselves believe in, just to get used to the practice, might be very useful. It might de-radicalize them.
How much,
and improve education.
You use your own word, but how much torture, or whatever you want to call it, was applied
Brian,
to him?
I don't think waterboarding is torture. And partly because tens of thousands of people have gone through that in SEER School and other U.S. military training facilities. But also I go back to a more classical treaty definition of torture, which is a permanent, irreversible change in someone's well-being. So when the Chinese government plucks out your eye or lops off your arm or extracts a healthy tooth without painkillers, that's torture. When the U.S. government puts a towel on your face and slowly pours water on it while you're in a prone position, that's uncomfortable, that's stressful. It might even feel like you're drowning. But it doesn't leave a mark. It doesn't cause permanent physical damage. And we know it doesn't cause permanent mental damage because there have been psychological studies of the veterans who've gone through this in various training facilities. And it leaves no trace at all. But it does get cooperation from the very hard cases.
When was he waterboarded?
In March 2003. And
Where?
never since.
Where?
That's an interesting question. I don't know the answer to that. And I don't know if that's been reported. I doubt it has.
Somebody uses, I mean, a lot of the folks in the public eye use the figure 180 sometimes he was waterboarded. Is that one day?
That's my understanding is that's 3 sessions over a relatively short period of time, maybe one day.
What resulted
183, though, is the number of times the water is poured on the face. So when people say he was waterboarded 183 times, they're being a bit cute.
It's interesting that we even have those facts.
Yes. Well, those facts come out of a legal document, out of a legal opinion issued by the CIA in response, I think, to an IG report, and that's how some of that came out.
Do they catalog all that stuff whenever they're dealing with these people?
Yeah, the CIA is kind of like the Wehrmacht in World War II. I mean, they keep obsessive record keepers. I mean, let's look at let's widen the frame. Look at the bureaucratic process for a moment. When you waterboard someone, there's a doctor in the room at all times. There's also a translator. There are other personnel standing by in the room, so that if anything starts to go wrong, the process can be stopped. The person can be saved. There are a lot of safeguards in effect. I mean, the people who are doing the waterboarding have been waterboarded themselves. They know what stress they're putting someone through.
Does the person being waterboarded know that the doctor's in the room and all that?
It's impossible for him not to know.
Yeah. KSM have a family?
Yes, a family of his own. Absolutely. He has a wife who's believed to be hiding in Iran. I think her name is Halima. And he has a number of children, at least 2 sons we know about, and possibly 2 daughters.
How is he kept in Guantanamo?
He is kept along with 4 or 5 other high-value detainees connected to 9/11, and that's part of a slightly larger group of about 15 or 16 really high-value targets.
Is he in a cell by himself?
I believe he is.
But
he's near the cells of others.
And have they stopped talking to him at this point, or are they still questioning him?
He's still questioned. He's still shown drawings or other documents or asked about a name, that kind of thing. But the period of intense questioning seems to be over, partly for political reasons. He clearly still knows things that have not come out. I mean, when someone breaks in waterboarding, they don't automatically disgorge everything they know the next moment. I should say one other thing. A lot of people say, well, waterboarding is so terrible that you'll say anything to make it stop. When they're waterboarding you, they're not really asking you that many questions. And the questions they are asking you are ones they already know the answer to, right? They want to test your veracity, your willingness to tell the truth. They're not asking you things they don't know the answer to. So there's no possibility of fake information. And if you give bad information, there are punishments. You're denied favorite foods, you're denied books to read, things like that.
Have you ever gone through that waterboarding experience?
I've tried to, and for all sorts of legal reasons, nobody wants to waterboard me. But I'm sure there are lots of critics of mine who'd love to do it, but I mean, a trained person.
So what kind of information has come out of KSM that is valuable?
A lot of we've stopped a lot of plots based on direct information from him. Attacks on the U.S. Embassy in Paris the U.S. Embassy in Singapore, the U.S. Embassy in Bamako, that's the capital of Mali, an attempt to sink U.S. warships off the Straits of Gibraltar, an attack on the Brooklyn Bridge, the Seattle Space Needle, the Library Tower in downtown Los Angeles, which also I think was blown up on Independence Day, an attack on the Empire State Building, the Baltimore City plots, a series of gas stations were going to be blown up in Baltimore. KSM's sister-in-law, in fact, was involved in that plot, Aifa Siddiqui, and so on. A plot to blow up the Panama Canal, a plot to blow up Heathrow Airport. Just because things haven't exploded and we haven't seen headlines of carnage in the past few years doesn't mean these guys have stopped trying. There were a lot of plots underway, and many of them were stopped. The shoe bomber plot, the Paris-Miami flight that was going to be blown up by Richard Reed by lighting a bomb in his shoe, that was stopped partly by information from KSM. The Jose Padilla dirty bomb is another one.
Where did KSM meet Osama bin Laden?
Apparently they met for the first time in Pakistan, probably near the Jalozeh refugee camp. But bin Laden maintains publicly they didn't really know each other then in the early 90s. They've had their first sit-down meeting in 1995 in Kandahar, near bin Laden's ranch there. And they temperamentally didn't get along. A second meeting about a year later led to another job offer for KSM, and that one he took. He wanted to go to work for Al-Qaeda. He had a wife, he had some children at that point. He was broke, and much of his cell, which had carried out attacks or attempted attacks in the Philippines, Pakistan, elsewhere, had been killed or captured. So he was at the end of his string. His wife is saying, basically, get a job. And so he went to work for Al-Qaeda.
Where was he positioned, and how did he put together 9/11? From what location?
From various cities in Pakistan and Afghanistan. He moved freely in all those cities. He seemed to prefer Karachi, and he had a number of relatives living in Karachi, Pakistan. And it was really, and this is one of the things I get into in the book, Mastermind, that for them for Al-Qaeda it was really a management problem. I mean, there were people quitting the plot and flying home, or people threatening to quit, or people getting in trouble with the law. There were at least 13 distinct opportunities to have stopped the 9/11 plot in different points in 2000 and 2001. Muhammad Atta pulled over by, I think, a Maryland state trooper, and so on. And so this just led to from an operational or management point of view, it was a nightmare for them. And unfortunately, they succeeded, and it was a nightmare for us.
Where's the money coming from?
That's a great question. Some of it is coming from Islamic charities and wealthy oil sheikhs in the Gulf and in Saudi Arabia and across North Africa.
Why are they doing it?
Ideological conviction. There is a fantasy that exists in the minds of many educated people, both in the West and in the Arab world and in Asia, that if you do something shocking enough, radical enough, that human nature will suddenly change. I mean, it's the same thing that led to the 1960s protests. The Paris takeover in 1968 is a classic example of this. Woodstock, that human nature would suddenly change and that this ideal society could be born. I mean, that's sort of the idealistic vision of terrorism, right? The other is that it's a Machiavellian attempt to seize power by terrifying people and using that fear to control them.
Why 15 of 19 hijackers from Saudi Arabia, and how much Saudi Arabian money is in all this?
I don't know how much Saudi Arabian money is in, but I'm sure it's a non-zero number. 15 of the hijackers were from Saudi Arabia simply because the U.S. State Department had a special program with Saudi Arabia. They didn't have this with any other nation on earth, called Visa Express, where you didn't have to go into the consulate or the embassy and look at a consular affairs officer and fill out forms and show identification. Instead, all that could be done by a travel agent and simply mailed into the embassy, where it was more or less rubber stamped. So it was much easier to get a U.S. travel visa from Saudi than it was from, say, Great Britain. And of course, much easier than any other Arab country. So while some visa requests from Yemen and Egypt and elsewhere were denied, all the Saudi ones were granted.
You keep telling us it's our own fault in a way by all these special deals and the need to attract people from other countries and providing easy access into colleges. I mean, do we need to re-examine the way we look at the rest of the world?
I think we do. I mean, I don't think I'm not one of these people who's paranoid about things overseas, but I do think we need to be realistic, and I think we need to rethink the college experience so there's not that degree of alienation, that foreign students get integrated and life here gets explained to them in a comprehensive way. I think civilian colleges can learn from military colleges. I think we also need to look at what foreign students we're letting in. I mean, at the time KSM was admitted to study at Chowan in North Carolina, he had been a member of the Muslim Brotherhood for 2 years, maybe 2.5 years in Kuwait. Why are we letting in, as to study the United States, people connected to the Muslim Brotherhood or to other extreme organizations? Frankly, I don't want neo-Nazis studying here either. So more background checks on the foreign students we admit need to happen. But of course, colleges and universities are financially dependent on this ocean of money that comes in from foreign students. And so they probably oppose any sort of realistic security checks for foreign students. That'd be quite a fight, but it's one worth having.
Why the special treatment for the Saudi Arabians?
The Saudis are beneficial to a number of business interests in the United States. And they and their wives are big spenders as well. So there's an economic benefit, and there's a long-term relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia. The two nations, at the top anyway, have been very close for I would say, close to 70 years. It's a unique relationship and one that's not ever been really studied honestly. And they had complained enormously that why they're not treated the same way people from Western Europe are treated. Before 9/11, there was something called visa waiver, where if you were a citizen of the United Kingdom or Ireland, or Germany, France, and so on, you were part of the visa waiver program, and you could just fly into the United States and show your passport and enter without a visa. And the Arabs didn't get the same treatment, and this is one thing the Saudis complained about bitterly, that they had to wait online with third world peoples, where an English secretary could just show her British passport and waltz right into New York. So Visa and Express was an attempt to give them some of the same privileges that Western Europeans and Australians had.
What's been the hardest part of you trying to write this book?
The gaps. I mean, I certainly knew who to talk to, and some of the people who to talk to, on the CIA secret prison project. But because there's lawsuits by the ACLU and other liberal groups, and the U.S. government, the U.S. Department of Justice under Attorney General Eric Holder is prosecuting a number of CIA interrogators. And so as a result, they're not willing to talk because anything they say could be used against them in court. And these guys stand to lose not just their liberty, but their homes, their pensions. They're in great legal jeopardy. And so that leads lots of people to only tell part of the story or to say nothing at all. And that was really hard. And I think Holder has dismissed so many of the legal actions involved in the war on terror. Just a few weeks ago, he dropped the case against Thomas Tam. You might remember he was the source behind the New York Times Pulitzer Prize-winning story that revealed the worldwide eavesdropping phone tap, warrantless phone taps that the U.S. government was conducting. And he violated, apparently, the law. He had a security clearance. These were secure, classified documents. He gave them to non-cleared personnel who he knew would publish it, reporters of the New York Times. It was a pretty clear-cut case. The Attorney General, for whatever reason, decided to drop that case. I can imagine one reason is he thought the fight over the war on terror in the Bush era was over, and to let this go quietly into the night. In that case, why not let the CIA officers go too? I mean, these guys are only doing their job. They extracted a lot of life-saving information from KSM and from other, Ramzi bin al-Shibh and other major high-value targets. Why put them in legal jeopardy?
Did you ask to see Khalid Shaikh Mohammed?
I did.
What'd they tell you?
Politely, no.
And why?
Probably for security reasons. And for legal reasons. If you believe the Geneva Conventions apply to people who are part of organizations that are not signatories to the Geneva Conventions, then sort of opening up a prisoner to public visits is a violation of Geneva. You can't treat people who are being held in combat, prisoners of war in effect, as animals in a zoo to be gawked at. That's very clearly in Geneva. And so there's that. There was the sort of lingering legal concern. But also, it's a secure place. A lot of the layout and organization of the place and who's involved is classified. And you can see why the U.S. government would consider it sensitive.
On your cover, it says author of the New York Times bestsellers Losing Bin Laden and Shadow War. Losing Bin Laden was written what year?
It was written 2001 and 2, and it was published in 2003.
What was your reaction when you heard that we had killed him?
Well, intense surprise, and then a little disappointment. And I'll tell you why I was disappointed. I would have been much more beneficial if we could have captured bin Laden alive and, frankly, waterboarded him. Because there's a lot of secrets that died with bin Laden. The location of sleeper cells in the United States or around the world, arms caches, what governments are supplying al-Qaeda with money and why, what are the names of those officials, what are the future plots against the United States or our allies. All that information is in his head, and now it's gone. That information would have been valuable. Also, I think it was a mistake to publicize his killing so quickly. We could have used a few weeks to swoop down and surprise some al-Qaeda elements around the world before we announced it.
We haven't seen you since a couple years ago when you were here, and since then you were made editorial director of the Washington Times, and it kind of blew up.
Yeah, that was a short-lived post.
What can you tell us? Because I know you filed a complaint against them. Has that been resolved with the?
That has been resolved. That case is settled, and there's been a payment. And they're governed by a confidentiality clause, so I can't say too much.
So you can't say a word.
Well, I can say a few things. Look, it was an exciting adventure.
Explain to somebody that doesn't have any idea what we're talking about.
Oh, right. The Washington Times is the second newspaper here in Washington, D.C., and known as a conservative paper. And I came on to remake the editorial pages, which had lost. We're not drawing the kind of attention that they wanted, and to upgrade the caliber of the staff. I recruited a whole new staff. We changed the layout and design both of the website and the print pages, and started to change the content. I thought the world was suffused with opinion now with bloggers. And so pure opinion doesn't work, but reporting mixed with opinion that advances the story but also tells you what to think about it is where editorial pages need to go. A model very similar to that of Robert Bartley's at the Wall Street Journal, the legendary editor there, the founder of the editorial pages there, essentially, the modern editorial pages. And, we were working diligently in that area, seeing great success. I think I saved about $1 million in costs by reorganizing things in the opinion section. Brought in a whole new staff. Web traffic was growing rapidly. And then there was a fight for control among the sons of Reverend Sun Myung Moon, who owned the newspaper, and that ended up ultimately pushing out about 70% of the staff. I was one of the first to go, as was John Solomon, the executive editor.
And you left when?
I left in October 2009.
I found on the web a charge of discrimination that you signed. And the reason I bring it up, because as you know, over the years in this town, the Post has done this as much as anybody. They wanted to point the finger at the Reverend Sun Myung Moon as if he was influencing editorial judgment. And in this filing that you made against the Times, you talk about having to go to a Unification Church event, I guess, in New York?
Yes.
Can you talk about that? Were you told you had to go to that if you were going to work there?
Yeah, I was made to realize that if I didn't go, that my prospects of continuing with the Washington Times would be very limited.
And you say you're an Episcopalian and you had no interest in being a part of the Unification Church.
I was certainly not interested. I'm a devoted Christian. I certainly was not interested in joining their church. Many wonderful people there. I liked many of them personally, but I found the whole ceremony revolting because there are elements of the ceremony that are essentially insulting to to Christianity, to Judaism, and to Islam, because they have someone representing a priest, someone representing a rabbi, and someone representing an imam walk up to us stage with a vial of water in their hand, and they pour it all simultaneously into a bowl. And this is to symbolize the unification of all the world's religions under the control of Moon. And that struck me as very strange.
What did you?
There was also a mass wedding there.
Did you go?
Did I go
to the wedding?
Oh, I was there in New York. Absolutely.
Why did you go? If
I wanted the opportunity to remake the editorial pages of the Washington Times, and boy, I'd seen lots of strange things all around the world. I thought I could see one more. I was surprised how deeply that ceremony affected me. How spiritually dangerous I found it.
And what impact do you think the firing of John Solomon and you has had on the Washington Times and its position in town here?
I think that's hard to assess. I hope the paper survives and continues. For about a year or so, it looked like it wasn't. I mean, they eliminated the sports section, and the paper shrank, and there was persistent rumors about its bankruptcy and going under. Now it seems that they've reconnected with Moon, and the money's flowing again, and they're rehiring people. So I hope, I wish them success.
Vassar College you graduated from? What year?
1990.
Born in New York City?
Yep.
Worked for the Wall Street Journal?
Yep.
Got that sneeze right in time? Worked for the American Spectator? What other organizations?
Let's see, I worked for Competitive Enterprise Institute in the early 90s. The Sunday Times of London, I was a member of their investigative team. I was at a think tank in Brussels, the Center for the New Europe.
And this book is what book for you? What number?
I think this is the 5th book.
And do you have a new one on the drawing board already?
Not yet. I'm actually playing around with a novel, a bit of a thriller.
The name of this book is Mastermind. Our guest has been Richard Miniter, the many faces of the 9/11 architect Khalid Shaikh Mohammed. And there are other Miniters in this world. Before we close it, where are your brothers?
My brother Brendan, who was at the Wall Street Journal after I was, he was there 10 years. He's now working for President Bush at the Presidential Library in Texas. And my brother Frank is the executive editor of the American Hunter magazine, and I see him about once a month, where he brags about his global exploits, hunting and fishing. My brother Henry is practicing law in Colorado and has just written a novel called Last Rites. So it's a busy family.
Thank you, Richard Miniter.
Thanks, Brian.
For a DVD copy of this program, call 1-877-662-7726. For free transcripts or to give us your comments about this program, visit us at qna.org. Q&A programs are also available as C-SPAN podcasts.